I will give you wealth, and I will buy you a mansion only if your daughter agrees to marry me.
The village market was always full of life, with traders calling out their prices and customers bargaining for the best deals. The scent of fresh vegetable, roasted plantain, and handmade soap filled the air. Abena moved quickly, weaving through the crowd with her basket balanced on her hip. She was focused on finding the best yam when suddenly she bumped into someone. A faint but gentle hand steadied her before she could stumble. Looking up, she met the warm gaze of a tall, well-built man with kind eyes. "I'm sorry," she said softly. The man smiled. "No harm done. I'm Kofi." His voice was deep yet smoothing. Abena hesitated for a moment before replying, "I'm Abena." They exchanged a brief but lingering glances before she nodded and continued on her way. In the days that followed, fate seemed determined to bring them together. Whether it was at the market, by the river, or along the narrow village paths, Abena and Kofi found themselves crossing paths again and again. Their conversation started out polite, discussions about the weather, the quality of crops that season, or the latest village news. But over time, they grew deeper. Kofi would ask her about her dreams, her childhood, and what made her happy. Abena, usually reserved, find herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone else. Kofi's presence was comforting, his laughter warm, and his words sincere. Kofi soon became a familiar presence in Abena's life. He would stop by her family's compound to help with small taxes, chopping firewood, carrying heavy load, or repairing broken tools. Her younger siblings took a liking to him, always running to greet him when he arrived. Her father, a man of few words, observed him quietly, while her mother would watch with a knowing smile. "He is a good man, Abena," she said one evening as they prepared dinner. Abena didn't respond, but her heart skipped a beat at her mother's words. One evening, after a long day at the market, Kofi offered to walk Abena home. The sun had set, leaving the sky painted in soft shades of purple and gold. The air was cool, and the only sound were the distant chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. As they walked side by side, their hands occasionally brushed, sending shiver through Abena's body. Kofi glanced at her, his voice gentle when he said, "I feel like I have known you my whole life, Abena." His words made her heart race, but she didn't reply. She was afraid of what she meant say, afraid of what she meant feel. As the days passed, the villagers began to take notice. Whispers spread about how Kofi and Abena always seems to be together. The older women smiled knowingly, while the younger girls looked on with curiosity, some with envy. Kofi started bringing Abena small gifts, a beautiful wooden comb, a bracelet made from smooth river stones. In return, Abena would prepare sweet dumplings for him or weave small clothes he would use while walking. These small gestures became their silent language, a way of expressing feelings neither had yet spoken aloud. One evening, as Abena helped her mother peel cassava, the conversation took an unexpected turn. "Kofi," her mother said suddenly, not looking up from her work, "do you have feelings for him?" Abena froze, her hands tightening around the knife. She wanted to deny it, but the truth was too heavy to ignore. "I think I do," she admitted in a whisper. Her mother gave her a small smile, the kind that held years of wisdom. "Love is something you feel in your heart. Don't ignore it, my daughter." Abena nodded, but deep inside, a storm of emotions raged. That night, Abena laid awake, staring at the wooden ceiling of her small room. Was she really falling in love? The thought excited her, but it also scared her. Love was beautiful, but it's also dangerous. She had seen women in the village weeping for men who had left them, seen heartbreak tear families apart. Could she trust her heart with Kofi? Would he stay, or would he break her the way she had seen others broken? The next day, as she walked to the river, she found Kofi waiting for her. He smiled, and without a word, they walked side by side. There was something different in the air that day, something unspoken yet understood. When they reached the riverbank, Kofi reached for her hand, but stopped just before touching it. Abena, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we were more than just friends? Abena's breath caught in her throat. The question was simple, but it carried so much weight. She looked at him, searching his face for signs of hesitation, of uncertainty, but there was none. Only warmth, only sincerity. I do wonder, she admitted, her voice just as soft. A gentle breeze passed between them, rustling the leaves, carrying away unspoken words. Abena looked up at the setting sun, her heart pounding. She knew in that moment that something had changed. Whatever lay ahead, whatever fears she had, one thing was certain, she was falling for Kofi. As they stood at the edge of the village, watching the sun dip below the horizon, their hands almost touched. It was a moment of silence, understanding, a quiet promise that whatever was happening between them was real. The world around them faded, leaving only the sound of their hearts beating in sync. And in that perfect fleeting moment, love began to bloom. Kofi and Abena's love grew deeper with each passing day. They spent hours walking through the village paths, talking about their dreams, their fears, and the kind of life they wanted. Sometimes they didn't need to speak at all. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with an unspoken understanding. Abena found peace in Kofi's presence, and Kofi felt whole whenever he was with her. She would smile as he told stories from his childhood, laughing at the silly adventures he had. He, in turn, admired the quiet strength in her eyes, the way she always seems to carry the weight of the world with grace. Their love was simple, pure, and strong, strong enough to make them believe that nothing could break it. But reality had a crude way of reminding them that love alone was not enough. Kofi had always known the truth, but he had pushed it to the back of his mind, not wanting to face it. He had no stable job, no land of his own, no real way to provide for a family. He did small jobs around the village, carving wood, fetching water, helping on the farms, but it was barely enough to survive, let alone build a future. The more he thought about it, the more the frustration grew inside him. How could he ask Abena to wait for him when he had nothing to offer her? How could he promise her a future when he wasn't even sure how he would survive the next few years? One evening, as they sat together by the river, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Kofi finally spoke the words that had been weighing on his heart. Abena, I need to leave, he said, his voice low but firm. Abena turned to him, her eyes searching his face. Leave, she asked, confusion flickering across her features. He took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. I love you, Abena, more than anything, but love is not enough. I cannot stay here and offer you nothing. I need to go to the city, work hard, and make money so I can come back and marry you properly. The words hung between them, heavy and painful. Abena's heart clenched at the thought of him leaving. She had known deep down that their lives in the village would not be easy, but she had never imagined a future without him by her side. She wanted to tell him to stay, to say that love was enough, but she couldn't. She knew Kofi. She knew his pride, his determination, his need to be the kind of man who would provide for the woman he loved. I understand, Kofi, she whispered, forcing herself to be strong. I want us to have a future together too. He reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly, as if he would make her feel the depth of his love through that one touch. Over the next few days, they began to prepare for his departure. They spoke about how they would stay in touch, though they both knew letters would take weeks to arrive. Kofi reassured her again and again, promising that he would return. I will make enough money, Abena. I will come back for you. I will show you how much I love you. Abena nodded, holding on to his words like a lifeline. She tried to be happy for him, to be excited about the future they were building. But every time she imagined life in the village without him, a deep sadness settled in her chest. The morning of Kofi's departure arrived too soon. The village was still waking up when he stood by the road. A small bag hung over his shoulder. Abena stood in front of him, her eyes already filled with unshed tears. I don't know how to say goodbye, she admitted, her voice trembling. Kofi cupped her face gently, his thumb wiping away a tears that had slipped down her cheek. Then don't, he said with a sad smile. This is not goodbye, Abena. This is just the beginning. I will come back for you. I swear it. His voice cracked slightly, and that was when Abena saw the truth. This was breaking him just as much as it was breaking her. The weight of their emotions was too much to hold back. As Kofi put her into his arms, Abena clung to him, her tears finally falling freely. Be safe, she whispered against his chest. Come back to me. He held her tighter, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Always, he murmured. The moment felt too final, too painful, but they had no choice. Love demanded sacrifice, and this was theirs. As Kofi finally stepped back, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden pendant he had carved for her. Keep this with you, he said, placing it on her palm, so you never forget that my heart belongs to you. Abena closed her finger around the pendant, holding it close to her chest. I will never forget, Kofi, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, without another word, Kofi turned and began walking away. Abena watched as he moved down the road, his figure growing smaller with each step. She wanted to run after him, to call his name, to tell him to stay, but she didn't. She stood there, her heart heavy with love and sorrow, watching until he disappeared into the horizon. The village was silent around her, but inside, her emotions rolled like a storm. She had never felt so alone, yet so certain of anything in her life. Kofi had left, but his promise remained, and so she would wait. No matter how long it took, she would wait for the man who had stolen her heart. The wind blew gently, rustling the trees as if whispering secrets only she could hear. Abena took a deep breath, wiping away the last of her tears. She turned back towards the village, clutching the wooden pendant in her hands. No matter how uncertain the future was, she had to believe in their love, because sometimes love was worth waiting for. At first, Abena tried to hold on to hope. She kept waiting for Kofi's letter or any news of him. She believed his promise that he would come back, that their love would survive the distance. Every day she looked for any sign, any small letter or messages, but none came. Weeks turned into months, and still there was nothing. Her heart ached with each passing day, but she told herself that it was only a matter of time before Kofi returned, just like he promised. Each day felt like an eternity, but she clung to the hope that their love would overcome everything. But as the months passed, the pain in her heart only deepened. Her hope began to feel like a cruel joke. The silence from Kofi was unbearable, and Abena's thoughts became filled with doubt. Was he still thinking about her? Was he still planning to come back? Or had he forgotten her? She couldn't understand why he hadn't written or sent a word. And the longer she waited, the harder it became to believe in his promise. She tried to keep her mind busy, but at night, when the house was quiet, her thoughts always returned to Kofi. The hardship came slowly at first, but soon it was undeniable. Abena's family had always lived modestly, but now things were getting harder. Her father, once the strong and reliable head of the household, had become ill. It started as a small cough, but over time it worsened, leaving him too weak to walk. The medical bill piled up, and Abena watched helplessly as their savings ran dry. There were days when they didn't even have enough to eat, and Abena's mother grew more worried with each passing day. They had to cut down on everything: food, clothes, and even firewood, but still, they couldn't seem to make ends meet. Abena took on more work to help. She wake up before sunrise, working until late in the evening, doing whatever she could to bring in money. She fetched water from the well, washed clothes for the neighbors, and sold small goods at the market. Every day felt like an endless circle of exhaustion, but she had no choice. Her father needed her. Her mother was too tired to carry the load on her own. Abena pushed through the pain, hiding her exhaustion behind a smile. But inside, she was breaking. She had never imagined that life would be this hard. Her mother noticed the change in her. "You are still young, Abena," she said one night, her voice soft with concern. "You shouldn't be carrying this much weight. It is too much for you." But Abena refused to complain. She had always been the strong one, the one who took care of others. "I will do whatever it takes to take care of us, Mama," she replied firmly, even though the word felt hollow. Deep down, she was scared. Scared of how much longer she would keep this up. Scared of what would happen if things didn't get better. But she couldn't let her family see her fear. As the months passed, neighbors began whispering about marriage proposals. They said it with kindness, as if they were offering solutions to Abena's problems. "A good marriage will take care of your family," some of the older women at the market said. "There are many good men out there who would take care of you, Abena." But her mother never pushed the idea. Abena noticed the concern in her eyes, the unspoken fear that her daughter might never find a way out of their struggles. Abena refused to think about marriage. In her heart, she was still waiting for Kofi. Even though the world around her seemed to fall apart, she couldn't let go of the love they had shared. She couldn't bear the thought of marrying someone else, of letting go of the future she had imagined with Kofi. She told herself that she would wait for him, no matter how long it took. She refused to accept that Kofi might never come back. One afternoon, as Abena sat at her store in the market, exhaustion weighed heavily on her. She had spent the whole day working, running errands for neighbors, and now her hands ached from the long hours of work. She was just finishing a sales when a man stopped in front of her store. He was dressed in fine clothes, his jewelry glimmering in the sunlight. He looked out of place in the village, and his presence immediately made her uncomfortable. He watched her for a moment before speaking, his voice smooth and confident. "You are a beautiful young woman," he said, his eyes lingering on her face. Abena felt a chill run down her spine. She forced a polite smile, hoping he would just buy whatever he needed and leave. "Thank you, sir. Do you want to buy something?" she asked, her voice sounding more distant than she intended. The man didn't seem to be in a hurry. He leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "More than something," he said smoothly. "I want to know you." His words sent a shiver through Abena. She didn't know who this man was, but there was something about him that made her uneasy. His eyes was too intense, his smile too knowing. Abena quickly finished the sales, handing him his goods and avoiding his gaze. "Thank you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Goodbye, sir." Without waiting for a response, she turned away, leaving the man to stand there, watching her as she walked away. That evening, as Abena sat with her mother, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her chest. "Mama," she began, hesitantly, "there was a man at the market today. He was strange. He kept saying things that made me uncomfortable." Her mother looked up from her work, concern flashing across her face. "Did he say his name?" she asked softly. "No," Abena replied, her voice trembling slightly, "but something about him felt wrong. I don't know what it was, but I didn't like the way he looked at me." Her mother's face grew with concern, and she sat her down. "Be careful, Abena. Some men don't take no for an answer." Abena nodded, brushing off the worry in her mother's voice. She didn't want to think about it, but deep down she knew that something about that man had unsettled her. What she didn't know was that this man, Mr. Akwa, would soon change her life in ways she couldn't imagine. Days after their first encounter, Mr. Akwa began to visit the market regularly. Each time Abena set up her store, she would notice him standing a distance away, watching her with that same unsettling gaze. His visits were always timed perfectly, as though he knew when she would be there. With a smooth and charming smile, he would approach her and start a conversation. "Abena," he would say, his voice dripping with confidence, "you are too beautiful to be working so hard. Why don't you come with me? I can offer you a life of comfort, a life without worry." His words felt like honey, sweet yet hollow. Abena's discomfort grew with each passing day, but she forced herself to remain polite. "I am not interested, sir," she would reply firmly, trying to stay composed, despite the unease building inside her. But he wouldn't relent. "You don't understand, Abena," he insisted one day. "You have so much potential. Let me help you realize it." As the days turned into weeks, Mr. Aqua's visits became even more frequent. He bought from her store almost every day, each time showering her with exaggerated compliments. "Such grace, such beauty," he would say, as if his words would make her forget her reality. He spoke of the life he could offer her, one of luxury and ease, far removed from the hardship she had known. Abena began to hate his presence, but it was impossible to avoid him. Everywhere she went, there he was, always offering her the same empty promises. "Your life could change in an instant if you just let me in," he would whisper, his voice low, almost seductive. Each time he spoke, Abena felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. Despite her growing fear, Abena's resistance was firm. "I have my own dreams," she would say, her voice trembling slightly, despite her best efforts to sound confident. "Please stop following me." But Mr. Aqua would simply smile, a knowing look in his eyes. He wasn't listening to her words. He was only interested in getting what he wanted. With each visit, his persistence wore down on her defense. And though she refused to admit it, she could feel the pressure building inside her. It wasn't just him anymore, it was her family, the people around her, all pushing her in a direction she wasn't ready to go to. One afternoon, as Abena hurried home after another stressful day at the market, she noticed a shadowy figure lingering in the distance. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized it was Mr. Akwa. He had been following her. She quickened her pace, hoping he hadn't noticed her, but as she rounded a corner and approached her gate, there he was, standing in front of her house, waiting for her. "Abena," he called out, smoothly, his voice as calm as ever. "I didn't mean to scare you. I simply wanted to talk." Abena stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't want to talk to you," she said, her voice sharp with anger and fear. "Please leave me alone." But Mr. Akwa was unfazed. He walked towards her house, ignoring her protests as if they didn't matter. "I will just speak with your parents then," he said, his voice smooth and calculated. "I am sure they would want to hear about the life I can offer you. After all, we are all just trying to make things better for you, aren't we?" Mr. Akwa arrived at Abena's house uninvited, his presence looming like a dark cloud over their small home. Her mother, though hesitant, welcomed him with the politeness expected of a good host. Though Abena could see the curiosity in her eyes, Mr. Akwa wasted no time. "I have been watching your daughter for some time now," he said to her mother, his tone smooth and confident, "and I believe I can offer her a future no one else in this village can. I have money, a home, and influence. If she marries me, she will never have to work a day again." His words hung in the air, each one striking deeper into Abena's heart like a stone. Her father, who had been bedridden for months, raised his head slightly at the mention of wealth. Though weak, his interest was piqued. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice faint but sharp. Mr. Aqua's smile widened, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "I just want her," he replied. "In return, I will make sure your family is well taken care of. I will give you a house, a land, and all the comforts that comes with marrying into a family like mine." Abena's heart sank as she listened. She had never seen her parents so desperate, so willing to sell her future for the promise of a better life. After that first meeting, Mr. Aqua's visit didn't stop. He came again and again, each time offering more money, more luxury, more promise of a life Abena never wanted. The fear in her chest grew with every word he spoke. She knew what he was offering, but it didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a trap. "Abena," her mother said one evening, her voice softer than usual, "this man can give you everything. You will never have to struggle again. Don't you want that?" Abena shook her head, the weight of her mother's words crushing her. "I don't want his life," she whispered, her voice barely hearable. "I don't want his wealth." Her mother sighed heavily, the lines of worry on her face deepening. "But we need it, Abena," she replied. "Look at your father. We are struggling. This might be our only chance." Her words were a plead, a desperate cry for help. Abena wanted to scream, to tell her mother that she wasn't just a pawn to be traded for a better life. "I am not just a commodity to be sold," Abena said, her voice shaking with anger and pain. The words tasted bitter, but they were the only ones she had left. But her mother only shook her head, her eyes full of sorrow. "You don't understand, Abena. This isn't just about you. It is about all of us. Can't you see? We are drowning. The pressure from her family grew as the day passed. Her mother, growing more desperate, began pleading with her. You have seen the life we are living, she said, her voice trembling. You have seen how hard we are struggling. Can't you see this is for the best? Even her father, weak as he was, added his voice to the chorus of plead. Abena, we need this. Your mother and I can't keep going like this. This is your chance to save us. Despite her protest, Abena felt the walls closing in. The dreams of a future with Kofi seems to be slipping further away. With every passing day, her family was no longer interested in her happiness, only in the promise of wealth that Mr. Akwa offered. You must marry him, her mother insisted one evening, her voice finer. You will be doing this for all of us. Do it for the family. Abena's heart broke as the weight of her family's expectation settled on her shoulders. The decision was no longer hers to make. Her once hopeful dream of Kofi's return were fading with each passing day, replaced by the harsh reality of her situation. She saw no way out. The marriage to Mr. Akwa was becoming unavoidable, and with it a future she had not chosen, a future she feared. As the days passed, the whispers in the village grew louder, and Abena began to feel as though the very air around her was thick with judgment. In the market, at the well, at every corner, the villagers spoke of her situations in hushed tones, but their words were clear. Mr. Akwa is a good man, a rich man. What are you waiting for, Abena? One woman said as she passed by her store. He will take care of you. Don't let this chance slip away. Another whispered, eyes full of expectation. The village women who had once expressed sympathy for Abena's love for Kofi now told her it was time to move on. You have waited so long, my dear. 3 years is a long time. Maybe it is time to look forward, they said, their voices gentle but persistent. Abena could feel their eyes on her wherever she went, as if her every move was under scrutiny, urging her towards a decision she didn't want to make. Mr. Akwa, never one to give up, continued his visit with more intent. He no longer just appeared unannounced, he arrived bearing gifts and promises. I will buy your parents new clothes, new house, everything you need. I will give you the life you have always dreamed of, Abena, he would say, his tone smooth and persuasive. The wealth he spoke of seemed endless, his assurance always grander. One afternoon, he handed her father an envelope with a substantial sum of money. This is just the beginning, he said, his eyes gleaming with confidence. If you allow me to marry your daughter, I will build you a house. I will give you riches, everything you want. No more struggles, no more hardship. Her father, his eyes widened with hope, took the money without hesitation. It's everything we need, he whispered to himself, his finger trembling as he clutched the envelope. Her mother, who stood nearby, watched him with eager eyes, the promise of a better life slowly eroding her judgment. As the days passed, Abena's mother, now fully in Mr. Aqua's corner, began to pressure her more and more. Think about it, my child, she would say, her voice soft but urgent. He can offer you everything, everything your father and I have always wanted. A house, wealth, comfort. Her words, once filled with caution and care, now carried a weight that Abena couldn't escape. Her father, too, joined the chorus of voices, pushing her to accept Mr. Aqua's offer. You are being selfish and foolish to wait for a man who may never come back, he would say. his frustration rising with every passing day. You have to think about us. We can't keep living like this. This is your chance, Abena. Every time he spoke, Abena's heart twisted, but she could not ignore the truth in his words. Her family's problems were too great, their suffering too deep, but how could she let go of the love she had held on to for so long? What about Kofi? Abena asked one evening, her voice trembling as she tried to hold on to the remnants of her past. What about him? I have been waiting for him all these years. He promised he'd do come back for me. Her mother's gaze softened for a moment, but then she sighed heavily. Do you not see? It's been 3 years, Abena. You haven't heard from him. What if he's never coming back? What if he has moved on? Her mother's words pierced her heart like a dagger, and for the first time, Abena allowed herself to consider the possibility that Kofi meant never return. The pressure from her family, from the village, from her own doubts was suffocating. The promises of wealth and security grew louder, drowning out the whispers of her heart. Her father, his voice shaking with desperation, came to her one evening as the sun set and the world seems to hold its breath. Abena, please, he pleaded, his voice strained with emotion. If you don't marry Mr. Akwa, I will, I will kill myself. Do you understand? I can't keep living like this. I'm too weak to walk. Your mother and I are struggling. We need this. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of her father's pain. Abena's heart shattered as she watched him, the strong man who had once carried their family with pride, now broken before her. His eyes, which had once been full of life and energy, were clouded with hopelessness. She could see the depth of his suffering, and it made her own pain feel even more unbearable. Her mother's tears, streaming down her face, added her voice to the plead. You don't know how much this means to us, Abena, she cried, her words breaking through the silence. Please don't make us suffer any longer. Abena felt her resolve weakening with every word. She wanted to resist, to hold on to the love she once shared with Kofi, but the weight of her family's pain was too much. She wanted to cry, to scream, but all she could do was stand there, trapped between the love of her past and the reality of her present. The days blurred together as the pressure became more overwhelming. Abena found herself unable to escape the constant reminders of her family needs and the village expectation. Her heart ached with each passing moment. She wanted to hold on to Kofi, to believe that he would come back for her, but the truth was becoming harder to ignore. She looked at her parents, at their pleading faces, and the weight of their desperation pressing down on her. She thought of the life they could have, comfort, stability, and freedom from the struggle, but at what cost? One evening, as she stood before the mirror in her room, Abena stared at her reflection, the woman who had once been filled with hope and dreams of love. Is this really what I have to do? She whispered to herself, her voice barely hearable. The words felt like a betrayal, a surrender to the circumstances that had trapped her. In that moment, the truth settled in her heart like a stone. The weight of her family's struggles, her own fears, and the promises of a better life were pushing her to the edge. She had no strength to fight. She could feel her heart breaking with each passing seconds, but she knew what she had to do. Abena walked quietly to her parents' room, where they waited anxiously. Her mother's tear-stained face looked up at her, desperate for an answer. The silence in the room was suffocating. Abena could feel her own heart pounding in her chest, the sound deafening in her ears. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words felt like they came from someone else. "I will do it," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will marry Mr. Akwa." Her mother and father's face lit up with relief, but inside, Abena felt nothing but emptiness. The decision had been made, and with it, the life she had dreamed of with Kofi slipped further and further away. And the weight of her decision hanging over her like a dark cloud. As she agreed to marry Mr. Akwa, she knew she had betrayed herself, but the pressure of her family's need and the village expectation had been too much to resist. Abena stood at the crossroad of her past and future. The decision already made, she knew there was no turning back, but she couldn't help but wonder if she had lost more than just Kofi in the process.